You know, I was born in upstate New York, Schenectady, New York. And it's funny, the day, this is Pearl Harbor Day today, when we're doing this, the war broke out. And I had the ability that when I heard a song, it came into my mental bank and I could play it without the music. That's always been a very strong point in my musical background. And so, make a long story short, as time went on, a lot of the musicians in my hometown were in service. No one was around. When word got around that I was able to play some of these club dates, you know, single engagements, then it was a thing. So I started very young. Believe it or not, I was about 12 years old. And my mother I had this bow tie to put on, you know. And that was it. And they'd say, Mrs. DeLuke, we're going to take care of Peter, but we need him, you know. And so that's how I started out.
I've actually been a union member since I was 16, about 1964, somewhere in there. The union, to me, is the people that are in the union, and because of that, they have the capabilities of deciding what you want to get out of the union, meaning how much do you want to make on X job. All the wages are set by the musicians themselves. They're not set by the union. So therefore, you have a say in how much you're going to make. And the union is going to protect that wage pay, that rate. So when you go to a certain job, you know that you're going to get X amount of money. So that, to me, is the most important thing, is that the scale is set. And to me, another major part of that is pension.
The Musicians Union has been great for me and for pretty much everybody that I know who is a member for the last 16 years, I think, is how long I've been associated with it. And I've probably been, like, just because of the business that I do with doing music for TV, have probably brought into the San Diego one in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 other musicians, composers and players who have just ended up being on enough stuff where it makes sense for them to be a member. And so when I think of the Musicians Union, I think of something that has been a tremendous blessing, like, and help to the livelihoods of a lot of musicians that I know.
Well, the need was that we weren't getting the right fees. The working conditions were horrible, just like with carpenters and all the electricians. You know, we didn't have any source of unity, you know. And with the union, that word union means that we are united, and we have similar outlooks on how we feel what we're worth.
That's the essence of the union, is a group of musicians who get together to establish the parameters of what is going to work and what's not going to work, and what we're going to allow to happen or not allow to happen. And so by this group of musicians, again, the union is not this building. The union is not some people often in a little room somewhere. The union are the musicians that play, and therefore it's those musicians who decide what the parameters are going to be with regards to wages, conditions, everything. It's a group of musicians, simple as that.
Samuel Gompers knew what he was doing, and all of those people. I mean, growing up, I remember John Lewis, the coal miners. I was saying, why is he doing that? You know, you know. But he was fighting for justice. It's a revelation. It's a revelation on why this country is as great as it is today, and I will believe that, and I can debate that with anybody. The fact that we have unions, it gives the middle class, that working class, something to look forward to constantly. And the working conditions are better, not only in music, but in everything, you know.
Often, the union will follow up afterwards with collecting a whole nother budget of residual income, which is super helpful. Like, everybody that I know struggles to various degrees with making a living as a musician. It's not like, you know, taking candy from a baby. There's some hustle that goes into it, and to have a check or a bunch of checks show up from the musicians union is a real like lifesaver. So a lot of times for a lot of musicians. Like I remember one of our composers at Singing Serpent, which I did for a long time. You know, she did this job and the budget wasn't so big or anything. She won it, and then $20,000 showed up as residual income, and she was just floored. I mean, you know, the year before I had hired her away from working at a shoe store, and she was just like a super talented composer and producer, and we brought her on board, and she kicked butt. And then the union like paid off all of her college debt and bought her a car. And so I like when things like that happen, I just feel like thank you to the union and to the history of the union for negotiating that these sorts of monies could be collected and given to the musicians who have made that have played on the recordings that are, you know, that are being used. That thrills me.
You meet people and you become friends with people, and there's a community of musicians. And the other thing that's really important is that the union does not get you jobs. I will say that right out. You're not going to walk down to the union and expect somebody to give you a job. But what the union does is give you the connection to all the other musicians, enabling you to put your card out there and say, I'm here, I'm available. And gradually over a period of time, when you start playing union jobs, those people are going to say, this guy can play. And somebody says, I need this instrument. And they say, try this person here because I heard him play. And that happens by playing in rehearsal bands down at the Union Hall, just getting to know people, gradually get your name out there, and that's how you get work. And that's how I've gotten my work over the last 50 years as a professional musician, by simply playing and being available and meeting people. It's all about meeting people. The other thing that the union does is stabilize the working environment. You know that you're going to work in a situation that's safe. You're going to be on a stage. If you're sitting on a chair, there's going to be a backrest there so that your chair doesn't fly off the back. I actually went off the back of a stage when I was really young, and nothing to keep me from doing that, so that's a safety factor. You're not required to show up for a job ridiculous amount of hours beforehand. I've seen that in a lot of situations where somebody wants you there early. They say, all right, I want you there 2 hours before the job. Well, the union isn't going to make that happen, because the union is going to say, all right, other than setting up, you need to be there 15 minutes before. If you want them more than that, you've got to pay them more than that. So you don't sit around waiting for things to happen because the client is concerned about everybody showing up. Union musicians tend to be better at showing up on time because they've been doing it, they're professionals. They expect to make X amount of money, so there's never a problem with people being late on a union job, whereas the other ones, I'm not saying that they would be late, but people are not as trusting of a non-union musician to be there on time, so therefore they ask them to be there at ridiculously early times. I've seen that a lot.
When I think of people who have had things used in advertisements, movies, things like that, if they're not associated with union, they can get paid through the Taft-Hartley Act, but not, I forget what the particulars are, but you can only do it a certain amount of time. So if you, like, you know, for example, like there would be players that I'll hire for something, right? And they'll play on something, and then it'll get used. And I'll say, well, hey, this is a union job, so you have the choice at this point whether to be Taft-Hartley'd, which is where you don't join the union, but you still get paid through the union, or become a member of the union. Well, of course, nobody wants to pay, you know, they're like, well, so either I can choose to pay startup dues or not, and nobody wants to. But then as they continue working in the world of union work for media, the choice is obvious because, well, I'm sorry, I can't hire you on this one. You got Taft-Hartley last month, so I'm gonna find another sax player. And they're like, oh, no, I'll sign up, you know? And it's you know, you kind of just, you don't get access to the residual money from this sort of stuff beyond your initial session fee if you're a, you know, a union player playing on something, unless you are a union member. And I think that's absolutely fair and right. If a organization, whether it's a corporate client of an agency or an ad agency itself, if they're a signatory with the union, it means that they have agreed to run all of the work that they do through the unions. So whether it's, you know, SAG-AFTRA for voice or on-camera talent, or whether it's the AFM for the musicians involved, they are going to be reporting all of the participants, players, actors, voice talents, so that the performances, the airings of the work can be tracked, and the musicians can, and et cetera, can be paid. If they're not a signatory, that doesn't mean that it can't be union, but it means that they're not contractually bound to run it through the unions. But for media stuff, the difference between union jobs and non-union jobs, budget-wise, is actually not significant. But what is significant is what happens after the job's done. With a non-union job, they'll say, "Here, musician, here's your, you know, your X amount of money." Maybe it's like, I don't know, the commercial world is weird. It could be between $1,000 and $100,000. And with the, you know, and that's what gets paid to the company, not to the individual composer. The composer might take home a quarter of that or whatever. But with a non-union job, that's the end of it. Good job. You know, you might be able to collect some with your performing rights organization for the writer's share. But that's it. When it's a union job, if there's, you know, singing, it'll be through SAG. And if there is, you know, of course, there's going to be instruments, that'll be paid through the AFM. And then as long as that spot or piece of music has a life being broadcast and it's being reported and tracked correctly, you're going to be receiving residual income. And so that can be just fantastic. You know, there's sometimes it's up to 5 years that you'll continue getting paid for a piece that you wrote and recorded and sold, you know. So while the budgets up front don't really differ, the back end, what happens afterwards, really does. That one's phenomenally hilarious. I think that the money that came from it is like, I think the last time I checked on Facebook, it had 28 million views, and then a few more million on YouTube, and the amount that I got paid for was $2,500. So, you know, it was one of those things where it was like, I didn't even know how much money would be coming in from it when they hired me to do it. They were just like, "Hey, you know, this is probably, nothing's going to happen with this, but can you write some stuff? You probably have some things even just sitting around." And so I went into the studio and I just kicked out a few things, and they totally loved one of them, and it just stuck. I made a couple changes, and then the Cubs actually won the World Series, and then they, you know, spent the night editing, and put it up in the morning. And I was thinking, oh, this is a pretty big job. That's cool. Probably going to have really decent money. And then it was like, oh, no, it didn't. But whatever. I mean, like, sometimes you do something and it's just like you just made $20,000 and you didn't even, you know, realize you were making that money. And sometimes you slave away and kick your butt and stay up all night working on things, and you make like $500. And that's just part of being a professional musician. It's like, you don't, at least in my experience, which is considerable at this point, is that you don't know what the big ones are going to be. Sometimes so you just kind of have to, like, if there's a ball coming, you take a swing at it, to use a sports metaphor or analogy or whatever. And if it connects, then you just see where it goes. You're like, sweet, I hit something, you know?
There's another aspect of this whole thing that that is important, and that's pension. When I negotiated these various contracts, I decided to talk everybody into having pension put on these contracts. Orchestra Nova didn't have pension. La Jolla Playhouse did not have pension. I'm not sure if the O Globe at the time had pension, but those two organizations didn't. And I had to talk the young musicians into agreeing to have pension being part of their wages. What everybody wanted at the time was, I want all the money right now. And I kept saying, you know what? If you get pension, 1%, 2%, gradually build it up to the point where when you retire, you're going to have a pension built up with the American Federation of Musicians Pension Fund, and you're going to get a check.
I think it's long overdue. It's going to be hard to do, only because of musicians themselves. They're their worst enemies. They just don't realize what they're doing. It's like when we were talking about our pension fund here. We didn't have it. And I kept saying, how awful. The musicians don't know. They're not going to be able, if they don't have a day job and where their Social Security benefits coming out, they're not going to have anything.
Many jazz artists don't have a pension. So again, I go back to the thing that you can actually make that happen by getting whatever organization you work for to sign a signatory agreement and have part of your wages be a pension rather than pure wages. And thinking into the future is difficult, but if you only think about what you put in your pocket right now, you're going to be like a lot of those musicians and not have any pension at all.
All of a sudden, someday, your hands are stiffer, your shoulders are a little different, you're walking it a little different, you can't put that bow the way you'd like it anymore, so you have to retire. What do you retire to? Social Security? Fine, but if you got another retirement, it makes it a lot nicer. So you can sit back and go to concerts and say, I just love it. I just love to hear that Mozart.
Now I'm getting a check every month because I negotiated that stuff into the contract, and there's musicians who didn't like it back then, but there's a whole bunch of them that are happy right now that Pat decided to put the pension in the negotiations, because it makes a big difference. When you get to be 65 years old, and I'm 68 right now, having something more than Social Security makes a big difference. And as a musician, it's really, really hard to do that. And that will never, ever happen if you're not in the union. Now, not to be perfectly honest, that not every union job has pension, but you have the capability of putting that in there. You can make that happen. If you work with a group all the time as a union member, you can put pension into that group. Just a signatory agreement with whoever's putting it together, it can happen. So the more groups that you work with that have pension, all goes into the same fund, except for the San Diego Symphony. That's a completely separate pension. But everything else goes into the AFFM pension, and then you can end up at 65 like I am and have not a wonderful pension, but a pretty good hunk of change, and a lot better than a bunch of musicians who did not have that.
A lot of musicians don't want to pay work dues. It's a small percentage. I mean, really small percentage. But they just feel, no, I want to keep everything myself. Well, all right. Either you feel strongly that you're in a solidarity type of situation where you want to do your part, or you don't. And unfortunately, that's still, I mean, even a lot of union musicians that I've said to me, work dues,
I've never hesitated for a second about maintaining and my membership to the union and paying my dues, because what's come back from it has always been like 50-fold, not tenfold, not, just like so much. I think the work dues is like 3%. And I've heard people complain about that before, and I just laugh at them because guys, like you wouldn't have access to that money without that. So what's the beef? I feel like it's never felt like a pain to pay the dues for the musicians union at all, because it's always coming back. SAG is a little heftier. SAG's like $1,400, I think, to join. That can be a little painful for a lot of people. But then again, like one good SAG job can be tens of thousands of dollars. So it's it's kind of a no-brainer.
I think if you know that you have to, you got dues coming up, you know, then you're going to say, well, let me put this aside. I'll budget. And that's what it takes, budgeting. I'm a union musician. It's so much a year to belong. Or if I pay quarterly, then it's that much, so much, you know. And those who do pay by the year, by the way, save usually a little money, not a lot, $5, $10, whatever it is. I happen to be one of those who pays once a year, even though I know I could die tomorrow, but it would be a donation. The way I look at it, would be a donation to where I have another friend of mine who plays in the band who is still playing quarterly, and he's older than I am. And I said to him not long ago, "What are you afraid? You're going to lose out on something if you pay by the year?"
But $150 to have access to this room every year and to be a part of an organization that's going to try to look out for your best interests that's great. But I think that outside of jazz and classical, probably a lot of people don't even know about the opportunity or reasons why they could or should be a part of the union.